The excavator rolled in just after sunrise. Its steel arm hovered over the bridge like a threat, while a group of neighbors gathered with phones raised, whispering, recording, waiting for a fight. At the center of it all stood the HOA president, a middle-aged white woman, sunglasses on, clipboard in hand, barking orders like she owned the land beneath her feet. "Start with the supports," she snapped. "I want it down today." A few feet away, I stood quietly. A middle-aged black man, short beard, trimmed mustache, a beige cowboy hat shading my eyes. Hands in my pockets. No shouting. No arguing. Just watching. Someone leaned toward me and whispered, "You gonna let her do this?" The HOA president noticed my silence and smirked. "Well," she called out loudly. "Any last words before we remove your illegal little bridge?" I didn't answer. That seemed to irritate her more than anger ever could. She laughed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "See," she told the crowd. "He knows he's wrong. That's what compliance looks like." The excavator moved. Metal screamed. Wood cracked. Concrete groaned as the bridge, the only access point to my land, began to collapse into the creek below. Neighbors gasped. Phones zoomed in. Someone shouted that this didn't feel right. I still didn't move. What none of them understood was this. I wasn't frozen. I wasn't defeated. And I definitely wasn't confused. I was counting. Counting every being they destroyed. Every bolt they snapped. Every second they spent tearing down something they had no legal right to touch. Because the truth was simple and devastating. I didn't stop the HOA from destroying my bridge. Because I was waiting for them to finish destroying county property. Before we go any further, drop your city or state in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. And if you believe calm strength beats loud authority every time, hit like and subscribe, because this channel stands for stories where power falls and truth wins. The bridge wasn't fancy. No paint. No sign. Just a solid, narrow structure stretching over a shallow creek, built years before the neighborhood ever had an HOA. It connected my land to the main road, a quiet, practical crossing used by delivery trucks, emergency vehicles, and anyone who needed to get in or out without driving miles around. I'd inherited the property after my uncle passed. He'd lived there most of his life, long before the subdivisions, the bylaws, and the people who suddenly believed paperwork gave them power over land they'd never touched. When the HOA expanded, they started calling the area a community improvement zone, as if saying it out loud made it true. They sent notices. Claimed the bridge violated aesthetic guidelines. Said it wasn't approved. Each letter came stamped with urgency, threats of fines, and bold statements about authority. What they never sent was proof of ownership. I didn't argue. I didn't appeal. I didn't show them a single document. Because I'd already seen the records, old county maps, maintenance logs, faded signatures that predated the HOA by decades. The bridge wasn't private. It wasn't optional. And it definitely wasn't theirs. They assumed silence meant ignorance. They assumed calm meant weakness. And most of all, they assumed no one would ever question them. They never once asked the only question that mattered. Who actually owned the bridge? Once the HOA decided the bridge was a problem, everything moved fast, too fast. Bright orange notices appeared overnight, stapled to posts and fences, warning of unauthorized structures and immediate corrective action. My name was printed in bold, followed by a list of fines that grew with each passing day. According to them, I was already in violation. The outcome, they said, was inevitable. The HOA president made sure everyone knew it. She walked the area with her clipboard like a patrol officer, stopping neighbors, pointing toward the creek, lowering her voice just enough to sound official. "The county's been informed," she told them. "We're fixing a safety issue." People nodded, relieved someone was handling it. When I crossed paths with her, she didn't bother lowering her voice. You had plenty of time to comply, she said sharply, eyes flicking to my cowboy hat like it offended her. Now we're past that. I asked one question, calm, simple. Can I see the county order? Her smile tightened. We don't need to show you anything, she snapped. The HOA has jurisdiction here. That word again. Jurisdiction. Letters turned into warnings. Warnings turned into threats. A deadline was announced before I'd even been given a chance to respond. Then came the emails to the neighborhood mailing list, framing me as uncooperative, difficult, a man who refused to follow community standards. Someone suggested calling the sheriff. The HOA president laughed. We don't need law enforcement, she said. This is administrative. Behind closed doors, contractors were contacted. Equipment was scheduled. No permits were posted. No public notices filed. Everything happened through HOA channels, fast and quiet, the way they preferred it. Neighbors started stopping by my gate. You sure you don't want to fight this? One asked. She seems serious, said another. A third warned me softly, she doesn't like being challenged. I thanked them. And did nothing. That seemed to enrage her more than resistance ever could. At the next HOA meeting, she singled me out by name. Called me non-compliant. Claimed I was putting the community at risk. She spoke over anyone who questioned the rush, brushing aside concerns with a practiced smile. The decision's already been made, she announced. Demolition begins Monday. Applause followed. Nervous, unsure applause, the kind people give when they don't want to be next. By the time the machinery was booked, the story had already been rewritten. In her version, the HOA was restoring order. I was the obstacle. And the bridge? That was already treated like a problem that had been solved. Monday morning came with engines. Not cars, of machines. Heavy ones. An excavator crawled down the dirt road just after sunrise, its tracks grinding against the gravel like a warning. A flatbed followed, loaded with tools and steel teeth meant to tear things apart. The HOA president arrived right behind them in her SUV, coffee in hand, sunglasses already on, looking satisfied before a single bolt had been touched. Neighbors gathered quickly. Some stood at a distance. Others came closer, phones out, recording. Everyone expected something, shouting, arguing, a last-minute injunction. That's usually how these things go. Instead, they saw me standing still. Same place as before. Beige cowboy hat. Hands relaxed. No rush in my posture. No fear in my face. The HOA president noticed immediately. She walked over with her clipboard, heels crunching on gravel, and stopped a few feet from me. This is your final notice, she said loudly, making sure the phones caught it. Once we begin, there's no going back. I nodded once. That was it. Her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Good, she said. At least you know when you're beat. She turned and snapped her fingers at the operator. Do it. The machine roared to life. The excavator's arm swung toward the bridge, its bucket slamming into the first wooden railing. The crack echoed through the creek bed, sharp, violent, final. Splinters flew. Someone in the crowd gasped. I didn't move. The second hit was harder. Support beams groaned under the pressure, nails popping free like gunshots. Water below rippled as debris rained down. A structure that had stood quietly for decades began to fail in minutes. The HOA president folded her arms, pleased. See, she called out to the crowd. Problem solved. A neighbor shouted, shouldn't there be permits posted? She ignored him. Another asked the contractor if this was safe. He shrugged. We were told it's approved. Approved. By who? The bridge sagged in the middle now, one side dipping dangerously low. The excavator adjusted, digging deeper, ripping out the central supports. Concrete cracked open, exposing rusted rebar, old, thick, built to last. built by someone who knew what they were doing. As the machine tore into the final load-bearing beam, the bridge gave way with a long, painful groan. The center collapsed into the creek, sending muddy water splashing high into the air. Phones zoomed in. Someone cursed under their breath. The only access to my land was gone. The HOA president laughed softly, shaking her head. "All that drama," she said. "For nothing." She turned toward me, expecting something: anger, regret, a breakdown. What she got was silence. I watched the operator shut down the machine. Watched workers gather their tools. Watched her pose for photos like she'd just won something. Inside, I wasn't angry. I was precise. I noted the time. The equipment used. The number on the excavator. The contractor's name stenciled on the side. Most importantly, I watched them finish. Because halfway through the destruction, one thing became very clear, even to the people recording. This wasn't a quick fix. This wasn't a minor adjustment. They weren't removing a nuisance. They were fully demolishing a bridge, beam by beam, support by support, without hesitation, without verification, without authority. And when the final piece collapsed into the creek, I finally turned away. Not because I'd lost something, but because they had just crossed a line they didn't even know existed. The bridge was gone. And now, so was their protection. The dust hadn't even settled before the HOA president was congratulating herself. She strutted along the creek, clipboard in hand, snapping photos of the collapsed bridge. "See? Problem solved," she announced to a small cluster of neighbors who nodded politely, trying not to stare too long at the chaos. Her voice was loud, confident, the voice of someone convinced victory was hers. I didn't move. I didn't say a word. Some neighbors approached, shaking their heads. "Are you okay?" one asked. Another whispered, "She didn't even need to ask you." They assumed my silence meant fear, defeat, or ignorance. I smiled quietly, a subtle, almost invisible tilt of the lips. They didn't notice. The HOA president finally turned to me, a smug grin spreading across her face. "You should have complied," she said. "Now everyone knows who's in charge." Her words bounced around in the morning air, but I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Behind me, tucked away in a small truck parked off the road, I was already on my phone. County offices. Engineers. Legal notices. Every step was calculated, precise, quiet. While she basked in her perceived triumph, the trap was closing silently. I glanced at the remains of the bridge. Splintered wood. Twisted metal. Concrete jagged and broken. It was perfect, not ruined, not damaged beyond recognition, just destroyed enough to make her arrogance visible. The neighbors whispered among themselves, still uncertain. "Did he plan this?" one asked. Another shook their head, bewildered. I didn't care what they thought. The HOA president strutted back to her SUV, calling her victory over the phones, laughing at her own cleverness. She had no idea the real authority was about to arrive. Because the moment she thought she had won, the moment she assumed my calm meant weakness, was the exact moment the county paperwork I'd quietly filed weeks ago was about to rewrite the story. And by the time the county officials appeared, everyone watching would realize exactly who owned the bridge, and who had been in control all along. Silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes, it's the sharpest weapon. The morning air had barely warmed when the unmistakable sound of tires crunching on gravel reached the clearing. At first, people assumed it was another contractor, the HOA's usual team returning to finish minor adjustments. But the trucks were different. Heavy-duty, official, marked with the county seal. I didn't flinch. I just adjusted my beige cowboy hat and watched. The first vehicle rolled to a stop at the edge of the creek. Out stepped two county engineers, their reflective vests crisp, not a speck of dirt on them. Behind them, a legal officer followed, carrying a thick folder. Cameras clicked automatically from neighbors' phones as word spread. These weren't HOA contractors. The HOA president, standing on the dirt path near the collapsed bridge, didn't notice at first. She was still savoring her victory, snapping photos, explaining to anyone who would listen how she had solved the problem and restored community order. Her sunglasses reflected the sun, hiding the uncertainty that hadn't yet formed on her face. When the county vehicle stopped, the engineers began walking toward the bridge. One of them lifted the folder and opened it, flipping through the pages with precise motions. My silence had made the neighbors uneasy earlier. Now, even the confident HOA president paused, noticing the official markings and authority in their posture. "Ma'am," one of the county officials called out, his voice calm but firm, carrying over the creak and splintered wood, "we've come regarding the bridge you demolished." She glanced over her shoulder, expecting perhaps a routine inspection or a question about permits. Instead, her eyes widened as he continued. "This structure is county property. Federally registered, maintained under official records for decades. Your demolition was unauthorized." The words hung in the air. The surrounding neighbors gasped, some whispering to each other, others recording every second. Her clipboard dropped slightly in surprise, then clattered onto the gravel. She reached to pick it up, but her fingers trembled. "You, what?" she stammered, voice faltering. The confidence that had carried her through threats, meetings, and destruction now evaporated. The county officer continued, flipping through the folder, revealing survey maps, maintenance logs, old signatures, and official seals. Each document was a hammer striking the final nail in her smug demeanor. "You destroyed county property," he said plainly. "You are personally liable for all damages and restoration costs. The demolition constitutes both civil and potential criminal violations. Work must stop immediately." For the first time that day, her face drained of color. The crowd had gone silent, watching her transformation from a victorious authority figure to someone exposed, embarrassed, and powerless. A few neighbors muttered among themselves, amazed at the turnaround. She tried to argue, to raise her voice, to regain control, but the legal officer calmly interrupted. "There will be no further discussion until the county has completed its inspection. Any further action on your part may result in criminal charges." Her hands shook as she reached for her phone. This isn't fair." I stepped forward for the first time, voice steady. "It's not about fair," I said. "It's about what belongs to who." The county officer nodded slightly at me, and a subtle murmur went through the crowd. Cameras clicked frantically. Neighbors whispered, some laughing quietly, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The HOA president's power had evaporated faster than she could comprehend. Every arrogant statement, every public humiliation, every claim of authority over my land had come crashing down, replaced by undeniable, official truth. By the time she turned to face me fully, I tipped my hat just slightly, letting the sun glint off the brim. Her face betrayed every emotion she had tried to hide: shock, fear, and humiliation. The bridge was gone, yes, but the real destruction had just begun, the demolition of her assumed authority. Justice didn't yell. Justice didn't rush in. It arrived quietly, backed by law, and revealed exactly who held the real power. And in that moment, with county officials standing firm and neighbors watching in stunned silence, everyone finally understood. I hadn't stopped them because I didn't need to. The county owned the bridge, and the truth had just been revealed. The HOA president's confidence evaporated faster than morning mist over the creek. Her sunglasses slipped down her nose as she fumbled with her phone, dialing, red-faced, muttering incoherently about permits and authorizations that didn't exist. The neighbors, who had once nodded politely at her proclamations, now whispered and pointed. Cameras and phones captured everything, the once dominant authority reduced to panicked gestures and shaky speech. The county officer didn't flinch. "The bridge is county property," he repeated calmly, as if addressing a child who refused to accept reality. "You are personally liable for the costs of demolition and the restoration of this structure. Any further unauthorized action will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law." A murmur went through the crowd. The HOA president opened her mouth, then closed it again, unable to form a coherent response. The contractors she had relied on glanced nervously at each other. Some backed away, realizing they were now complicit in the unlawful destruction. This can't be right," she finally stammered. You assumed authority you didn't have," I interrupted, voice calm but firm. "And now you're facing the consequences." Her hands trembled as she clutched her clipboard. The neighbors whispered, some snapping photos, others recording live videos. For the first time, the narrative she had controlled for so long was slipping out of her grasp. The county engineer outlined the penalties: immediate restoration of the bridge at her expense, fines for each violation, and a full report submitted to local law enforcement for review of potential criminal charges. The HOA president's smug smile had been replaced with disbelief, fear, and shame. Her attempts to argue or explain only made her humiliation worse. The crowd, once silent spectators, now whispered among themselves, she had no right to do this. Phones continued to capture every flustered gesture, every awkward movement. Even neighbors who had been skeptical of me now looked on with quiet admiration, realizing the patience and strategy behind my calm. One by one, HOA board members arrived, realizing the depth of their collective error. Whispered conversations, hurried explanations, and visible panic replaced the earlier sense of superiority. The president tried to assert control again, but the weight of official authority, county records, legal officers, and the eyes of the community held her in place. By mid-morning, the bridge had been photographed, documented, and logged. Her claims of control were no longer credible. Local news, alerted by neighbors and official notices, began reporting the incident, an HOA illegally demolishing county property. Her authority had crumbled publicly. She had humiliated herself more thoroughly than any neighbor could have dared. The crowd's whispers of doubt became outright discussions of accountability, and the HOA president's face told the full story: arrogance destroyed, power stripped away, credibility in ruins. Neighbors now approached me quietly, offering apologies for the chaos, expressing disbelief that such authority could be so easily toppled. I nodded, quietly acknowledging their gestures, knowing that patience, preparation, and the law had done more damage to her ego than any argument or confrontation ever could. The bridge may have been destroyed by their hands, but the real consequence had been far greater: the public dismantling of their assumed authority. By the time the county officials left, the lesson was clear to all: underestimating who holds true power, the law, the land records, and the quiet patience of those wronged, is a mistake that comes with a very public price. The crowd had grown tense. Phones were raised, neighbors whispering, contractors frozen mid-step. Even the HOA board members hovered nearby, unsure whether to intervene or flee. And there she stood, the HOA president, flushed, trembling, every ounce of arrogance drained from her face. She tried to argue, voice rising. This is ridiculous. I followed the rules of the HOA. But the county legal officer cut her off with calm authority. There are no HOA rules that allow demolition of county property. Nothing you did was legal. Your claims of authority are void. Her mouth opened, then closed. She searched the crowd, hoping for an ally, a sympathetic nod, but all she saw were whispers, shocked faces, cameras recording every moment, and me, standing tall, hat slightly tilted, hands relaxed at my sides. The silence in my presence weighed heavier than any machinery, any shouting, any threat she had ever wielded. I don't understand," she stammered. I finally spoke, voice low but carrying over the creek, calm as the morning air. "You don't govern the county. The county governs you." The words hung there like steel. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Phones zoomed in. A neighbor gasped audibly. The contractors shifted uneasily, realizing the depth of their mistake. Even the board members' faces turned pale. Her knees almost buckled. She clutched the clipboard as if it could anchor her to authority, but it offered no safety. Every plan she had made, every humiliation she had delivered, every claim of power over me, all crumbled in a single, undeniable sentence. The county officer nodded once at me, signaling that everything had been handled lawfully, correctly, without any aggression on my part. The crowd erupted, soft at first, then louder, into whispers of approval, shock, and awe at what had just unfolded. The HOA president's face was unreadable now, a mix of fear, disbelief, and the bitter realization that her power was gone. No shouting, no pleading, no excuses could restore it. In that moment, everything shifted. The bridge may have been gone, but justice had arrived. Authority had been stripped from someone who had abused it, humility forced upon someone who had never considered the consequences. And as the county team began walking back to their vehicles, the crowd's attention shifted to me, the quiet man who had let them make every mistake, let them think they were in control, only to reveal that true power had always been on my side. For the HOA president, the lesson was final and undeniable: never underestimate who really owns the land, or the law.